Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Amon Rûdh.
I'm Damrod.
I'm Greg. Belgreg et Sturb.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time we continued chapter 21. Thingol gave Beleg leave to go and protect Turin in the wilderness. Beleg asked for a sword, and Thingol gives him Anglachel, a powerful sword made from iron that fell from heaven by Eol, father of Maeglin. Melian gave Beleg Lembas to aid him. Meanwhile, Turin and his band of outlaws captured a dwarf named Mîm and demanded that he take them to Amon Rûdh. Turin and Mîm realized that one of the outlaws killed Mîm's son, and Turin promised to pay recompense. Beleg found Turin, and he assisted the outlaws and again attempted to persuade Turin to return to Doriath. Mîm and his living son developed a hatred for Beleg. Today we continue chapter 21, beginning on page 205 of the second edition. Who knows now the counsels of Morgoth? Who can measure the reach of his thought? Who had been Melkor, mighty among the Ainur of the great song, and sat now, a dark lord upon a dark throne in the north, weighing in his malice all the tidings that came to him, and perceiving more of the deeds and purposes of his enemies than even the wisest of them feared, save only Melian the queen? To her often and the thought of Morgoth reached out, and there was foiled. And now again the might of Angband was moved, and as the long fingers of a groping hand, the forerunners of his armies probed the ways into Beleriand. Through Anak they came, and Dimbar was taken, and all the north marches of Doriath. Down the ancient road they came that led through the long defile of Sirion, past the isle where Minas Tirith of Finrod had stood, and so through the land between Malduin and Sirion, and on through the eaves of Brethil to the crossings of Teglin. Thence the road went on into the guarded plain, but the orcs did not go far upon it, as yet, for there dwelt now in the wild a terror that was hidden, and upon the red hill were watchful eyes of which they had not been warned. For Turin put on again the helm of Hador, and far and wide in Beleriand the whisper went, under wood and over stream, and through the passes of the hills, saying that the helm and bow that had fallen in Dimbar had arisen again beyond hope. Then many who went leaderless, dispossessed but undaunted, took heart again and came to seek the two captains. Dor Cuarthal, the land of bow and helm, was in that time named all the region between Teglin and the west march of Doriath. And Turin himself was named anew Gorthal, the dread helm, and his heart was high again. In Menegroth and in the deep halls of Nargothrond, and even in the hidden realm of Gondolin, the fame of the deeds of the two captains was heard, and in Angband also they were known. Then Morgoth laughed, for by now the dragon helm was Húrin's son revealed to him again, and ere long Amon Rûdh was ringed with spies. In the waning of the year, Mîm the dwarf and Ebun his son went out from Baran Donwedd to gather roots for the wild for their winter store, and they were taken captive by orcs. Then for a second time Mîm promised to guide his enemies by the secret paths to his home on Amon Rûdh. But yet he sought to delay the fulfillment of his promise, and demanded that Gorthal should not be slain. Then the orc captain laughed and said to Mîm, "Assuredly, Turin, son of Húrin, shall not be slain." Thus was Baran Donwedd betrayed, For the orcs came upon it by night at unawares, guided by Mîm. There many of Turin's company were slain as they slept. But some fleeing by an inner stair came out upon the hilltop. And there they fought until they fell, and their blood flowed out upon the seragon that mantled the stone. But a net was cast over Turin as he fought, and he was enmeshed in it, and overcome, and led away. And at length, when all was silent again, Mîm crept out of the shadows of his house. And as the sun rose over the mists of Sirion, he stood beside the dead men on the hilltop. But he perceived not that not all those that lay were dead, and by one gaze was returned. For by one his gaze was returned, and he looked in the eyes of Beleg the elf. Then with hatred long stored, Mîm stepped up to Beleg, and drew forth the sword Anglachel that lay beneath the body of one that had fallen beside him. But Beleg, stumbling up, seized back the sword and thrust it at the dwarf. And Mîm, in terror, fled wailing from the hilltop. And Beleg cried after him, "The vengeance of the house of Hador will find you yet." Now Beleg was sorely wounded, but he was mighty among the elves of Middle-earth. And he was moreover a master of healing. Therefore he did not die, and slowly his strength returned. And he sought in vain among the dead for Turin to bury him, but he found him not. And then he knew that Húrin's son was yet alive, and taken to Angband. With little hope, Beleg departed from Amon Rûdh, and set out northward toward the crossings of Teglin, following in the track of the orcs. And he crossed over the Brithiac and journeyed through Dimbar towards the pass of Anak. And now he was not far behind them, for he went without sleeping, whereas they had tarried on their road, hunting in the lands and fearing no pursuit as they came northward. And not even in the dreadful woods of Tar-Nifuin did he swerve from the trail, for the skill of Beleg was greater than any that have been in Middle-earth. But as he passed by night through that evil land, and came upon one lying asleep at the foot of a great dead tree, and Beleg, staying his steps beside the sleeper, saw that it was an elf. Then he spoke to him and gave him lembas, and asked him what fate had brought him to that terrible place. And he named himself Gwindor, son of Gwilin. Grieving, Beleg looked upon him, for Gwindor was now but a bent and fearful shadow of his former shape and mood. When in the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the lord of Nargothrond rode with rash courage to the very doors of Angband, and there was taken. For few of the Noldor whom Morgoth captured were put to death, because of their skill in forging and in mining for metals and gems. And Gwindor was not slain, but being put to labor in the mines of the north. By secret tunnels known only to themselves, the mining elves might sometimes escape. And thus it came to pass that Beleg found him, spent and bewildered in the mazes of Tar-Nifuin. And Gwindor told him that as he lay and lurked among the trees, he saw a great company of orcs passing northwards. And wolves went with them, and among them was a man whose hands were chained, and they drove him onward with whips. "Very tall he was," said Gwindor, "as tall as the men are from the misty hills of Hithlum." Then Beleg told him of his own errand in Tar-Nifuin, and Gwindor sought to dissuade him from his quest, saying that he would but join Turin in the anguish that awaited him. But Beleg would not abandon Turin, and despairing himself, he aroused hope again in Gwindor's heart, and together they went on, following the orcs until they came out of the forest on the high slopes that ran down to the barren dunes of Anfoglyth. There, within sight of the peaks of Thangorodrim, the orcs made their encampment in a bare dell as the light of day was failing, and setting wolf-sentinels all about, they fell to carousing. A great storm rode up out of the west, and lightning glittered on the shadowy mountains far away, as Beleg and Gwindor crept towards the dell. When all in the camp were sleeping, Beleg took his bow, and in the darkness shot the wolf-sentinels one by one and silently. Then in great peril they entered in, and they found Turin, fettered hand and foot, and tied to a withered tree. And all about him knives that had been cast at him were embedded in the trunk, and he was senseless in a sleep of great weariness. But Beleg and Gwindor cut the bonds that held him, and lifting him, they carried him out of the dell. Yet they could bear him no further than to a thicket of thorn trees, a little way above. There they laid him down, and now the storm drew very near. Beleg drew his sword Anglachel, and with it he cut the fetters that bound Turin. But fate was that day more strong, for the blade slipped as he cut the shackles, and Turin's foot was pricked. Then he was aroused into a sudden wakefulness of rage and fear, and seeing one bended over him with naked blade, he leapt up with great cry, believing that orcs were come again to torment him, and grappling with him in the darkness, he seized Anglachel and slew Beleg Cuthalion, thinking him a foe. But as he stood, finding himself free, and ready to sell his life dearly against imagined foes, there came a great flash of lightning above them, and in its light he looked down upon Beleg's face. Then Turin stood stone still and silent, staring on that dreadful death, knowing what he had done. And so terrible was his face, lit by the lightning that flickered all about him, that Gwindor cowered down upon the ground and dared not raise his eyes. But now in the dell beneath the orcs were aroused, and all the camp was in tumult, for they feared the thunder that came out of the west, believing that it was sent against them by the great enemies beyond the sea. Then a wind arose, and great rains fell, and torrents swept down from the heights of Tarnafuin. And though Gwindor cried out to Turin, warning him of their utmost peril, he made no answer, but sat unmoving and unweeping in the tempest beside the body of Beleg Cuthalion. When morning came, the storm was passed away eastward over Lothlan, and the sun of autumn rose hot and bright. But believing that Turin would have fled far away from that place, and all trace of his flight be washed away, the orcs departed in haste without longer search. And far off Gwindor saw them marching away over the steaming sands of Unfoglith. Thus it came to pass that they returned to Morgoth empty-handed, and left behind them the son of Húrin, who sat crazed and unwitting on the slopes of Tarnafuin, bearing a burden heavier than their bonds. Then Gwindor roused Turin to aid him in the burial of Beleg. And he rose as one that walked in sleep, and together they laid Beleg in a shallow grave, and placed beside him Belthronding, his great bow, that was made of black yew wood. But the dread sword Anglachel Gwindor took, saying that it were better that it should take vengeance on the servants of Morgoth than lie useless in the earth. And he took also the lembas of Melian to strengthen them in the wild. Thus ended Beleg Strongbow, truest of friends, greatest in skill of all that harbored in the woods of Beleriand in the elder days. At the hand of him whom he most loved, and that grief was graven on the face of Turin and never faded. But courage and strength were renewed in the elf of Nargothrond, and departing from Tarnafuin, he led Turin far away. Never as they wandered together on long and grievous paths did Turin speak. And he walked as one without wish or purpose, while the year waned, and winter drew on over the northern lands. But Gwindor was ever beside him to guard him and guide him, and thus they passed westward over Sirion, and came at last to Eithel Ivrin, the springs whence Nerog rose beneath the mountains of shadow. There Gwindor spoke to Turin, saying, "Awake, Turin, son of Húrin, Thalion. On Ivrin's lake is endless laughter. She is fed from crystal fountains unfailing, and guarded from defilement by Ulmo, lord of waters, who wrought her beauty in ancient days." Then Turin knelt and drank from that water, and suddenly he cast himself down, and his tears were unloosed at last, and he was healed of his madness. There he made a song for Beleg, and he named it Laur Cu Beleg, the song of the great bow, singing it aloud heedless of peril. And Gwindor gave the sword Anglachel into his hands, and Turin knew that it was heavy and strong and had great power, but its blade was black and dull, and its edges blunt. Then Gwindor said, "This is a strange blade, unlike any that I've seen in Middle-earth. It mourns for Beleg even as you do. But be comforted, for I return to Nargothrond, the house of Finarfin. And you shall come with me, and be healed and renewed." "Who are you?" said Turin. "A wandering elf, a thrall, escaped, whom Beleg met and comforted. Yet once I was Gwindor, son of Guilin, a lord of Nargothrond, until I went to the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, and was enslaved in Angband." "Then have you seen Húrin, son of Galdor, the warrior of Dorlomen?" "I have not seen him, but rumor of him runs through Angband that he still defies Morgoth, and Morgoth has laid a curse upon him and all his kin." "That I do believe," said Turin. And now they arose, and departing from Eithel Ivrin, they journeyed southward along the banks of Nerog, until they were taken by scouts of the elves, and brought as prisoners to the hidden stronghold. Thus did Turin come to Nargothrond. So in summary, Morgoth sends forces southward again. Turin and Beleg, the helm and the bow, win acclaim for their heroics. Through this, Morgoth learns the whereabouts of the son of Húrin. Mîm betrays them and leads a band of orcs to Amon Rûdh. The orcs slay many of the men at night and capture Turin. Mîm realizes there is a survivor, Beleg. He takes up Anglachel to slay him, but the injured elf fights him back and Mîm flees. Beleg heals and pursues Turin's captors. He finds Gwindor, an elf of Nargothrond who is captured in Nirnaeth Arnoediad, but escaped through secret tunnels. Gwindor joins Beleg, and they find the orc camp and Turin tied up. Beleg cuts his bonds, but pricks his foot, waking Turin in fear and rage. Turin takes Anglachel and kills Beleg, thinking him an enemy. A fierce storm drives away the orcs. They bury Beleg with his bow, but take Anglachel and the lembas. Gwindor takes Húrin to Eithel Ivrin, where he is finally able to grieve the loss of Beleg and is healed of his madness. Then they reach Nargothrond as captors. Wow, it was a moving story.
A lot.
I was taken by surprise. I did not remember this.
I find most TV shows and films very predictable. It's hard to surprise me in a film and give me like a sense of, oh, I did not see that coming. What's going on? But I mean, is that the same with you guys, or are you more like wrapped up in the story and not really?
Yeah, usually I'm not like trying to anticipate much
Okay.
what's coming. I just kind of take it in as it comes.
So
But I get what you're saying.
yeah, I think like when I first started watching films, before I started to pick up on patterns of formulas of characters and betrayal and that kind of stuff, I remember that feeling of just like, there's something I don't trust about that guy, but you don't really bring a conclusion of like, oh, he's going to be the bad guy later on in the show. Tolkien did that to me. He gave me that feeling again with Mîm, because remember in the previous episode I shared that there was like, it was treacherous that he would bring the elves to his house, but then I guess it's not treacherous because there wasn't like a city full of elves. It was just his dwelling. But there we go. He betrayed him. He was the bad guy. I don't like Mîm anymore, Cameron. So I'm going to take that stand and say I think he's treacherous. He's slimy. I knew I didn't trust him all along.
Okay. What do you think his motivation was for leading the orcs back? His own safety, right?
Yeah, I don't care.
He's a coward.
Yeah. And that was the same motivation as before. He did it once, he's going to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, I was surprised, speaking of being surprised at the death of Beleg. That took me by surprise. It's like the most trustworthy of friends goes all this way to release Turin, and then Turin is the one that slays him with that dreaded sword. It's just terrible. It's so sad.
You know what? I'm going to share with you a very brief story.
Called the Silmarillion.
No, I stayed at a house. There's a bunch of people staying there all at once, and for some reason, none of the door handles worked properly. They didn't latch, they didn't lock, nothing. And I walked into someone sitting on the toilet, and as I was like walking backwards out of the bathroom, I didn't know what to do to make it better.
The lightning shone in the windows, and then you saw his face briefly.
Her face.
Oh, goodness me.
So I like backed out, and I just said, like, I didn't know what to do to make it better. So I just said, I didn't see anything, as I like scrambled away. And I learned in that moment that maybe you've been in a situation like this on either end of it, but I learned in that moment that being the perpetrator is way worse. It's way worse than being the victim of that kind of thing. I think it's way worse.
Maybe
you're the guilty party in the.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying.
Anyway,
that's understandable.
Morgoth is kind of this way. Like I think at the very beginning of this reading, he talks about that, where he's always thinking about what his enemies are up to. So he can't have rest because he's always worried about retribution for all the terrible things he's done. But I think like Turin experiences this too, where it wasn't even purposeful. He just saw someone standing over him with a sword. So he took it and fought back and killed his best friend. And now he's the perpetrator in this. He's the aggressor in this, and you can see it like the whole rest of the reading. He's just silent, which is how I was when I walked in on that young lady. He just like is carrying this burden now.
Are you still carrying the burden?
Okay, do you have a funny follow-up to that? I just, it was a super embarrassing thing, and it's funny to talk about now, but I was talking to the mother of a friend of mine whose house it was, and I was recounting this story like years later, but the girl that I walked in on was in our presence, but not like in the room. Like I was like, oh, this happened one time when I was staying at your house. And then she's like, oh my gosh, do you remember? Wait, come over here. Do you remember when this happened? Do you remember when Greg walked in on you in the bathroom?
I bet that was terrible for you.
That was like the twist of the dagger. Anyway,
talking of Twisted the Daggers, the fact that they must have had such a fight, like that he couldn't say it's me, it's me, it's me. But like it was probably they were too busy, just like no.
It was
I think
probably
just a
quick,
sudden
right?
thing. It was so sudden.
Like he grabs the sword right into the heart or something like that.
Exactly.
That's how I imagined it.
That's how I imagine it too.
Oh, I imagine that there was struggle.
No, because he was like
There was, like, a
asleep or
brief-
something.
Yeah, he was asleep, but he wakes up and then
Says grappling with him in the darkness, he sees
grappling is
Anglachel.
Oh,
yeah. So there's like a struggle, but I imagine it was like a pretty intense struggle where they had to like all of their energy had to be focused on the strength of.
I mean, he's just waking up from this stupor as well. So yeah, Beleg could have been like warning him or saying, "No, it's me," but it was too late.
Is there a film where something like that happens?
Yeah, I think half of them.
Half of the films.
half of all
Yeah.
films.
Yeah.
So, Anglachel, is there a lesson here? If something is made for an evil purpose, it should never be used. Like, speaking of the ring, sometimes it's used, but it's like you probably shouldn't use it unless it's like absolutely necessary at the uttermost, edge of hope or despair. And with Anglachel, like he picks this sword and he knows it has evil purposes or like a evil in it, but it's really powerful. So it seems to me like the fault was in the choosing of the sword in the first place. There was many swords he could have chosen.
I'm not sure if. Well, I mean, objects are amoral in our world. I don't know if they are in that world. I don't know if it's.
Well, no,
object.
they're definitely not amoral and just dumb in this world, because there was a Melon saying that this sword will not serve its handler, and
no, I'm saying in
not...
our world, objects are amoral. I'm not sure if they are.
I'm talking about this world.
Okay, and by this world you mean Arda.
Yeah.
So you're making the claim that in Arda, objects are not
certain
amoral.
objects you shouldn't wield, like the ring, like Anglachel or whatever it's called.
You know what though? I think maybe there is. I think this sword might be amoral, and here's why: it mourns Beleg's death. Like that's what Gwindor says later. This is a strange blade, and unlike any that I have seen in Middle Earth, it mourns for Beleg even as you do.
Yeah.
But be comforted, right? And I think there's something about it. It's like it's not that it has like this evil will. It just is. It's like has this doom about it. Like bad things will happen because it's a sword. It kills people. Good and bad.
Bad things will happen because it's a type of sword made by a dark elf
who has his heart in it. So it seems like it might be more magical or enchanted.
Did you guys ever see those Final Destination movies?
I didn't know.
Yes.
So the first one's
really good.
It was like really like death is like stalking these people, right? And it's always very overt. Like it's like actively like water spilling out that this person will slip on. But in the later ones, it's more like it's very accidental. Like all of their deaths look like accidents. But the first one, it's like they're kind of attacked. And I think this sword, it's like it's kind of an accident thing. Like it wasn't like I don't know. We could spend forever talking about the sword, but it just pricks his foot. It's not like
but the way it's phrased. So earlier Melian says there is malice in this sword. It will not love your hand. It won't abide with you long. And then at this critical moment, it says fate was that day more strong. So there's like a fate behind it. It's not just like clumsiness.
Right.
There's bent towards destruction.
Yeah, I mean, it says the dark heart of the smith still dwells in it. So I think there's a very strong case that there is some kind of weird enchantment over it, where it still possesses like part of the soul of its creator, which presumably is gone. And that is a maliceful soul that I guess still can. It is tormented by the fact that it is slain a good thing like Beleg.
Okay, let me ask you this then. Why does it mourn Beleg if it's like full of malice?
Well, I just said
It's
that.
not
I said
100% evil.
Yeah.
But it is.
You
it
gave
has
the reason
heart
earlier.
of a dark elf in it. Basically.
You gave the reason earlier for Melkor that he can't. He always lives in the fear of like the consequences of his actions. So there's a sense of like conscience is still troubled by the bad things it does. And maybe that's the curse of the sword, is that he was I don't know, but you could imagine he was lured into creating this great sword of power. He creates it, he ends up trapped in it, and now his punishment is that he has to slay things that he doesn't want to slay. You can see the it's not a big jump to go from that happens throughout all this book. So what's the name of the sword? I'm gonna look it up on our
Anglachel. ANGL.
EL at the end?
Yep.
Or AL? Yeah.
CHEL. Yeah.
Let's see what Arda says.
Well, this is we should come talk about Anglachel on Discord. I have one other thing. I know we got to wrap up soon, but I have one thing to ask about or to mention. This is kind of related to what you said, Dan, about like not knowing which character can be trusted. And this is Morgoth achieving what he wants in the world, where nobody knows who can trust you. And I really did not trust Gwindor, because he was a thrall in Angband for some time. And we've heard that like those people who were thralls there just return willfully to, like, sometimes Morgoth sets them free as his spies and stuff. So I was just like very wary of Gwindor, not sure if he could be trusted, because he's just been. But I think what I'm seeing more so is that he's actually just a broken person. He's not like evil, or he hasn't been twisted to Morgoth's purposes. I don't think he's just a shell of his former self. Does that sound right?
Who's the shell of his former self?
Gwindor.
Yeah. He does seem to have pity for Turin. He's helping him heal,
And it says that he escaped, but did he really escape? Or
yeah, and if we remember back when we hear about the thralls, they always kind of return back.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's that possibility here in him. There's an attachment. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see. We'll find out.
What a great way to describe Beleg Strongbow. Belgreg.
Belgreg.
Truest of friends, greatest in skill of all that harbored in the woods of Beleriand in the elder days.
Last thought on the sword.
Rest in peace.
A brief look into Arda. There's not a whole lot about like how it was created, but that is also a reoccurring theme behind the magical things of Tolkien's world, is that they often have this like obscure magic that seems really powerful, mysterious, and mystical, but there isn't any like explanation of like how it ended up getting that way. So
yeah, there's no like midichlorian explanation.
It's not like a formulaic thing, and like an obvious magic that you can pursue as an art.
Is it a soft magic again? The idea of like a soft magic.
So, and maybe some of our listeners know a bit more about the lore of this sword, but as far as I could tell from my encyclopedia, that nothing really comes up, just the history of it, of when it started and what it was used for.
If you like what you hear, go ahead and rate us 3 Silmarils out of 3. Follow us everywhere at Before the Fellowship. Join the discussion on Discord. Link is in the description. And send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next week as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.